The world of Xylos Prime was a forgotten jewel, a verdant orb orbiting a placid yellow sun in a stellar nursery of swirling nebula and nascent star stuff. It lay far beyond the charted regions of the segmentum ultima, a verdant, wild garden ignored by the rapacious maw of the Imperium, and largely unmolested by the myriad terrors that plagued the galaxy. Here, amongst the sky-reaching fern trees and bioluminescent jungles, dwelt the Kroot, specifically the kindred known as the Ghost Eaters. They were not notable for their size or their ferocity, but for their insatiable curiosity, a trait that had led them to this remote paradise millennia ago, far from the influence of the great Tau Empire or the eternal wars of their own kind. The Ghost Eaters, named for their ancestral habit of consuming the memories and essence of sentient prey to glean knowledge, were a lean and swift lineage, their quills often shimmering with faint, ethereal colors, a subtle reflection of the unique organisms they had assimilated throughout their long, meandering migration. Their shaper, Kalar, was an elder by Kroot standards, his broad brow creased with generations of ancestral memories, his quills a dull, scarred green, betraying countless close encounters. He possessed a keen intellect, even for a shaper, and an instinct for opportunity that bordered on prescience. It was Kalar who led them to the cavern. The cavern had been discovered by the younger hunters, drawn by an unnaturally resonant hum that vibrated through the very bedrock of Xylos Prime. It was a place of silent, pulsating energies, deep within the planet's primary moon, its walls weeping iridescent moisture that tasted of mineral and something else, something ancient and alive. Within its lightless depths, the Ghost Eaters found them, the Valar. They were unlike any species the Kroot had encountered before. Not true animals, not plants, but something in between, resembling intricate, crystalline root structures that branched and intertwined across vast subterranean networks. Each Valar node pulsed with a soft, internal light, and when the Kroot came close, a strange sense of calm, an almost narcotic bliss washed over them. The Valar did not move, did not speak in any language known to the Kroot, yet they communicated. Their existence was a vast, interwoven network of thought, emotion, and perception, spanning the moon's interior like a living neural net. They spoke through vibrations, through empathic resonance, through a gentle, insistent hum that spoke of ancient knowledge and boundless peace. Kalar observed for a full cycle of Xylos Prime, his shaper's wisdom whispering warnings. Yet his curiosity, the driving force of his kindred, pushed him forward. He understood that the Valar were a species of pure thought, their physical forms merely anchors for their collective consciousness. This was a prize unlike any other. The potential for knowledge, for adaptation, for evolutionary leaps was immeasurable. Against the cautious urgings of some of his older kin, Kalar sanctioned the first consumption. Carefully, ritualistically, a small group of Kroot warriors severed a glistening segment of the Valar network. The section, once separated, pulsed erratically, its light dimming, yet the overall hum of the cavern remained. The chosen Kroot, young and vital, consumed the essence. There was no immediate transformation, no visible physical change. For a full Terran week, nothing. Then the dreams began. They were not the normal Kroot dreams of ancestral hunts or primal fears. These were kaleidoscopic visions of light and shadow, of interwoven realities, of a vast, unseen ocean of energy that churned beyond the stars. The Kroot who had consumed the Valar essence began to wake with headaches, their senses overstimulated, their hearing picking up frequencies no Kroot had ever perceived, their vision seeing colors that did not exist in the material spectrum. One young hunter, Gnarl Quill, stared for hours at a single leaf, claiming he could see the life force flowing through its veins, hear the whispers of its growth. Another, a veteran scout named Stalker Maw, found he could sense the fear of prey from miles away, a primal dread that echoed in his very bones. Kalar, having consumed a small portion himself, felt it too. A burgeoning awareness, a dull ache behind his eyes, as if a new sense organ was trying to sprout in his mind. He saw fleeting glimpses of the future, felt the emotions of his kindred without them speaking, and heard, deep in the quietest moments, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonated with the very fabric of existence. It was beautiful, exhilarating, terrifying. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that they had unlocked something profound, something that would change the Ghost Eater's kindred forever. He could not have known then that this gift would become their enduring curse, drawing the baleful gaze of a galaxy far more vast and hungry than even his ancient kindred could comprehend. The feast had begun, and the bill, though yet unseen, would be catastrophic. The aftershocks of the Valar essence consumption ripped through the Ghost Eater's kindred like an unseen contagion. It began subtly, a persistent hum behind the eyes, a prickling sensation on the quills, as if the very air had become charged with an unheard frequency. For Kroot, whose existence revolved around the acute perception of their physical environment, the scent of prey on the wind, the tremor of distant movement, the precise angle of a target's vital organs, this burgeoning sixth sense was less a gift and more a brutal assault on their carefully honed reality. Gnarl Quill, the young hunter who had first claimed to see the life force in a leaf, now found himself utterly undone by the mundane. The jungle, once a tapestry of familiar dangers and bounties, became a chaotic symphony of unheard energies. He would stand frozen, eyes wide, quills twitching uncontrollably as the silent screams of dying insects, the slow, ponderous pulse of the ancient fern trees, and the raw, unfiltered hunger of every predator within a mile radius crashed into his mind. Food became an agony. He could taste the genetic memory of its struggle, the slow dissolution of its cellular structure. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into vivid, shattering nightmares, where the familiar shapes of Xylos Prime twisted into impossible geometries, and silent voices whispered prophecies of ruin in a language his conscious mind couldn't grasp. His body, once lean and agile, became gaunt, his quills dull and brittle from the constant psychic strain. He often clasped his head, trying to press the cacophony into silence, his growls of frustration replaced by whimpers. Stalker Maw, the veteran scout, fared little better. His enhanced ability to sense prey had quickly spiraled into a torment. He could feel the desperate, echoing fear of every creature hunted and killed on Xylos Prime over centuries, an ancestral miasma of terror that saturated the very soil. His finely tuned predatory instincts, once his greatest strength, were now crippled by an overwhelming empathy for his quarry, a perverse connection that made the kill unthinkable. He would often drop his rifle, staring into the eyes of a terrified grazer, its primordial fear shrieking in his mind, until another Kroot had to step in and perform the kill. The act itself sending fresh waves of psychic pain through him. He began to isolate himself, seeking out silent hollows, trying to dull the endless chorus of existential dread that now permeated his every waking moment. His once sharp, black eyes now held a haunted, distant look, reflecting horrors only he could perceive. But it was Kalar, the Shaper, who bore the heaviest burden. His older, more developed mind, steeped in generations of assimilated knowledge and tempered by countless trials, proved a more robust but ultimately more vulnerable vessel for the Valar essence. The dull ache behind his eyes quickly intensified, blossoming into a constant, throbbing pressure. His visions were not as chaotic as those of the younger Kroot, but they were far more profound, far more unsettling. He saw not just colors that did not exist, but patterns in the air, distortions in the fabric of space itself, like ripples on an unseen pond. He heard not just whispers, but the faint, mournful cries of entities beyond the veil of reality, entities drawn to the burgeoning psychic beacon his kindred was unwittingly becoming. His empathy, always a crucial tool for a shaper in understanding his kindred's needs and motives, became an open wound. He felt the fear of gnarl quill, the despair of stalker maw, the nascent anxieties of every Kroot within the kindred, all simultaneously. Their mental and emotional states were laid bare to him. 1,000 fractured mirrors, reflecting the growing unease. He felt the pangs of hunger, the subtle irritations, the fleeting joys. Every intimate detail of his kindred's internal landscape became his own. This hyper-empathy, meant to bind his kindred closer, instead threatened to tear Kalar's mind apart, blurring the lines between his own thoughts and those of his charges. He found himself retreating into meditation, trying to erect psychic barriers that offered only fleeting respite. The most terrifying aspect of his awakening, however, was the burgeoning warp sensitivity. It was subtle at first, a cold spot in the warmth of the sun, a flicker of shadow in his peripheral vision where no physical shadow should be. Then came the whispers, not the comprehensible language of the Valar, but a guttural, primal cacophony that brushed against the edges of his sanity. In the deepest hours of the Xylos prime night, when the jungle pulsed with its own bioluminescent rhythms, Kalar would feel a distinct presence. It was a malicious, observing hunger, like a titanic beast stirring from an eons-long slumber, its eyes fixed on his kindred. He would see fleeting, ephemeral shapes, tendrils of black smoke coiling from nothingness, impossible geometries shifting in the corners of his vision. The brief, horrific impression of vast, malevolent intellects brushing against his own. These were not the spirits of ancestors, not the echoes of fallen prey. These were things alien and inimical, creatures of the outer dark, drawn to the psychic ripples the ghost eaters now emanated. The kindred, rooted in their ancient beliefs, struggled to interpret these new phenomena. Some of the younger, less affected Kroot saw it as a glorious evolution, a new phase in their genetic journey, an unprecedented leap granted by the consumption of the Vaelar. They spoke of becoming soul hunters or mind stalkers, envisioning a future where their kindred dominated all others through sheer mental prowess. They tried to harness these new senses, attempting to influence minor creatures with their thoughts or predict the path of prey with newfound accuracy. These attempts, though often clumsy and uncontrolled, sometimes met with unsettling success, fueling the belief in their newfound power. Others, particularly the older Kroot, and those most affected by the sensory overload, viewed it with growing dread. The elders, those whose quills were thin and brittle with age, those who remembered the ancient laws and the whispers of forbidden knowledge, spoke of a broken barrier. They recalled fragmentary lore, passed down through generations of consumed memories, of other species who had dabbled in unseen energies and paid a terrible price. They saw the madness creeping into the younger hunters, the haunted eyes of Stalker Maw, the tortured cries of Gnarl Quill, and knew this was no simple evolution. This was a curse, a profound imbalance. Kalar, caught between the two factions, felt the full weight of his decision. He had led them to this. He had sanctioned the consumption. He was the root of this torment, the anchor point for the psychic storm that was gathering. He felt the strain on his own mind, the constant pressure of 1,000 thoughts and 100,000 unseen senses. He knew, with a certainty that settled like a lead weight in his gut, that the true nature of their gift and the horror it heralded was only just beginning to reveal itself. The tremors of the immaterium were growing stronger, the unseen hungers more insistent, and Xylos Prime, once a forgotten sanctuary, was slowly, inexorably, becoming a beacon in the terrifying darkness. The initial agony of the Vaelar essence, the disorienting cascade of raw psychic data, gradually began to coalesce into something more. For a Kroot kindred built upon adaptation and the assimilation of advantageous traits, the psychic awakening, though harrowing, was nonetheless a potent new evolutionary vector. Under Shaper Kalar's watchful, increasingly strained gaze, the Ghost Eaters began to learn to wield their affliction, transforming the curse of overwhelming perception into the blade of unforeseen advantage. The shift was most pronounced in the hunt. Traditional Kroot hunting was an art of supreme physical prowess, honed senses, and primal cunning, a dance of scent, shadow, and sudden brutal violence. Now, it became something else, something chillingly precise. When a patrol of Ghost Eaters stalked a herd of thornhorns, a notoriously skittish and aggressive megafauna indigenous to Xylos Prime. The difference was stark. Before, it would have been a laborious affair, requiring hours of tracking, careful wind readings, and synchronized flanking maneuvers. Now, the Kroot moved with an unnerving, almost prescient fluidity. Gnarl Quill, still plagued by sensory overload, found that in the adrenaline-fueled focus of the chase, the psychic noise sometimes coalesced into actionable data. He didn't just hear the frantic thrumming of a thornhorn's heart. He felt its primal fear spike, saw a fleeting image of its anticipated bolt into the tangled undergrowth. He would subtly shift his weight, aiming his rifle not where the beast was, but where it would be a heartbeat later. Stalker Maw, though still struggling with empathy, found that his enhanced senses allowed him to discern not just the scent of a creature, but the specific chemical signature of its hormonal fear, the unique taste of its adrenaline, a signature that flared intensely in moments of panic. He could then project a faint, almost subliminal psychic pulse, a focused spark of predatory intent, directly into the thornhorn's primitive mind, directing its flight path into waiting ambushes with uncanny efficiency. The result was carnage. The thornhorns, bewildered and stampeded by unseen forces, fell with barely a sound, their usually formidable charges deflected by a precisely placed root, or a perfectly timed volley of Kroot rifles. The hunt was over in minutes, where it once took hours. The Kroot, efficient death dealings orchestrated by an. They moved at a pond, a mental kill signal from Kalar, a projected image of a target's weak point from a squad leader. These were the new languages of the Ghost Eaters. This unnerving precision extended beyond mere hunting. Xylos Prime was home to other Kroot kindreds, lesser tribes who had settled in different biomes, often warring over hunting grounds or access to rare resources. One such kindred, the Stone Bones, were formidable adversaries, known for their brutish strength and well-entrenched, often trap-laden territories. When the Ghost Eaters encroached upon their prime hunting grounds near the crystalline rivers, the Stone Bones responded with their usual ferocity, setting complex tripwires and concealing pits lined with razor-sharp quills. But the Ghost Eaters navigated the traps with chilling ease. A scout would mentally ping a hidden pressure plate, causing the Kroot behind him to subtly alter their stride. The Stone Bones ambushers, hidden in the dense foliage, found their own thoughts and intentions subtly mirrored, their plans anticipated, their intended targets vanishing into the deeper shadows before they could even loose an arrow. The Ghost Eaters moved through the Stone Bones territory like ghosts, their psychic whispers anticipating every parry, every thrust. In the ensuing skirmish, the Ghost Eaters demonstrated a terrifying tactical superiority. While the Stone Bones fought with their usual savage determination, the Ghost Eaters moved with an almost preternatural grace. They foresaw lunges, deflected blows before they landed, and exploited momentary lapses in concentration with brutal efficiency. A Kroot warrior, his mind flooded with the immediate future, would effortlessly parry an axe blow and simultaneously deliver a fatal thrust, all in a single, fluid motion. Their enemies found themselves facing adversaries who seemed to read their very intentions, who struck from impossible angles, and whose coordination was flawless. The battle was brief, devastating, and utterly one-sided. The Stone Bones, their ranks decimated, retreated in disarray, leaving the Ghost Eaters as the undisputed masters of the central biomes of Xylos Prime. This period marked the zenith of the kindred's tactical prowess. They conquered indigenous megafauna that had previously been considered unhuntable, their psychic probes pinpointing vital organs or exploiting moments of confusion. They quelled rival Kroot tribes who could not fathom the invisible advantage their foes possessed, eventually assimilating many of the defeated. Their genetic legacy diluted by the Ghost Eaters' unique dietary choices. Xylos Prime, once a sprawling mosaic of competing life, now largely bowed before the silent, prescient will of the Ghost Eaters. Yet, this burgeoning power was not without its cost, nor its unsettling undercurrents. Kalar, observing his kindred, saw the chilling efficiency in their movements, the cold, calculating precision that replaced the primal joy of the hunt. The faces of his warriors, once alight with fierce exhilaration after a difficult kill, now often bore a look of distant exhaustion, their eyes holding a flickering, unnerving light. The constant psychic effort, the ceaseless influx of sensory data, was draining. Even as they grew stronger, more dangerous, they were also becoming more brittle, their minds stretched to breaking point. The whispers, too, grew stronger during these moments of intense psychic exertion. During a particularly fierce hunt against a pack of subterranean burrow beasts, the collective psychic focus of the Ghost Eaters had flared brilliantly, illuminating the tunnel networks in their minds. But from the edges of that mental light, Kalar had perceived darker, more ephemeral shadows reaching out, drawn by the raw psychic energy. He caught glimpses of impossible colors, heard fleeting, guttural snarls that had nothing to do with the burrow beasts. It was as if every act of psychic assertion, every display of their new power, chipped away at the veil between realities, creating minute fissures through which the unseen hungers could glimpse their prize. The Ghost Eaters had achieved unprecedented dominance, an evolutionary leap unparalleled in their kindred's history. They were masters of Xylos Prime, their every action guided by a newly awakened sixth sense. But Kalar knew, deep in his burdened mind, that this mastery came with a terrible price, one that had only just begun to be exacted. The tremors of the immaterium, once subtle, now resonated with increasing strength, a distant drumbeat announcing the approach of something far more ancient and terrible than any foe the Ghost Eaters had yet faced. The veil between realities, thin and permeable in the remote reaches of the galaxy, now thinned to a fragile membrane around Xylos Prime, stretched taut by the Ghost Eater's burgeoning psychic might. What began as unsettling visions and faint whispers soon escalated into something far more tangible, more terrifying. The Ghost Eaters, once masters of their physical domain, now found themselves contending with a foe that defied comprehension. A malign presence drawn from the raw, unthinking chaos of the immaterium. It started with anomalies. The jungle, already a riot of peculiar flora and fauna, began to twist into impossible forms. Trees would wither and blacken overnight, their leaves curling into grotesque, skeletal hands, only to bloom anew with unnaturally vibrant, pulsating fungi that wept ichorous fluids. The local fauna, once predictable in their routines, became erratic, displaying uncharacteristic aggression or profound lethargy. A pack of predatory sky striders, known for their territorial ferocity, were found huddled together, whimpering, their bodies covered in intricate, self-inflicted wounds, their eyes wide with unseen terror. The very air, especially near the Valar cavern, took on a cloying, metallic scent, like old blood and ozone, heavy with a sense of dread. The Kroot, with their enhanced senses, were the first to truly perceive the incursions. Gnarl Quill, his mind a constant battleground of chaotic perceptions, often saw the fleeting shapes first. Shadows that were too deep, too hungry. Detachments from their physical forms, flitting between the fern trees. These were not the solid, predictable shadows cast by the twin moons. These were absences, voids that seemed to suck the light out of the air, leaving behind a profound chill. He would shriek, pointing a trembling finger at empty space, describing things with too many teeth, or eyes like burning coals, that no other Kroot could yet perceive. At first, the others dismissed him as a victim of his own fractured mind, a casualty of the Valar's curse. But then, others began to see them, too. A hunting party, tracking a herd of grazers, reported feeling a sudden, inexplicable dread. One warrior swore he saw a glint of impossible brass amongst the leaves, heard a guttural roar that vibrated through his very bones, only to vanish without a trace. Their prey, meanwhile, panicked and stampeded, leaving behind a trail of blood and fur, not from injury, but from pure, unadulterated terror. The first true demonic incursion was swift and brutal. It happened during a deep jungle hunt, where a particularly potent psychic flare from a group of Kroot attempting to coordinate a complex ambush had inadvertently ripped a small, localized hole in reality. From the shimmering tear in the air emerged a single, lesser demon, a bloodletter, its horned head and sinuous form a testament to the savagery of Khorne. It was a creature of pure, incandescent rage, its blade an extension of its impossible will. The Kroot, for all their new psychic prowess, were utterly unprepared. Their rifles, designed for biological targets, struggled to find purchase on the daemon's ephemeral flesh. Their enhanced senses, so finely tuned for the material world, were overwhelmed by its unnatural presence, a sickening aura of hatred and bloodlust that washed over them like a physical blow. The daemon moved with impossible speed, a blur of red and brass, tearing through their ranks with contemptuous ease. Its unholy blade sliced through flesh and bone as if they were water, leaving behind wounds that shimmered with dark energy, refusing to close. The psychic Kroot, instead of fighting it, found themselves paralyzed by its alien presence. Gnarl Quill, present during the attack, fell to his knees, clutching his head, screaming as the daemon's bloodlust resonated directly in his mind. 1,000 echoes of murder and rage. Stalker. Ma, his new empathy a burden, felt the daemon's utter joy in violence, a sensation so pure and horrific it threatened to shatter his sanity. He couldn't fight. He could only cower, overwhelmed by the sheer, unadulterated malice. It was only through the sacrifice of an older, non-psychic Kroot warrior, a veteran who fought with pure, unyielding ferocity, born of instinct rather than psychic foresight, that the demon was finally banished. Using an ancient ritual blade steeped in the blood of countless beasts, he managed to stab the creature through its chest. The blade, unable to kill the daemon, nonetheless disrupted its form, causing it to shriek and dissolve back into the warp with a sound like tearing metal. The warrior, horribly wounded, would die moments later, but not before delivering a stark lesson. Their new powers were useless, even detrimental, against these horrors. Kalar, upon hearing the reports, felt a cold dread settle in his bones. He had sensed the presence, heard the whispers, but to see the physical manifestation of such malevolence, to witness his kindred's utter helplessness against it, was a sobering blow. He understood now that the hum he had perceived, the unseen ocean of energy, was not simply a source of power, but a terrifying dimension teeming with predators far beyond anything the ghost eaters had ever conceived. The demonic incursions became more frequent, more varied. Small, chittering horrors, creatures of pestilence and decay, would infest the jungles, causing rapid decomposition of ancient trees and leaving behind a sickening miasma. Insidious whisperings would infest the dreams of the sleeping Kroot, sowing paranoia and discord, turning friend against friend with imagined slights. At night, luminous, jelly-like entities, drawn by raw psychic energy, would float silently through the encampments, their touch causing inexplicable euphoria or profound despair, draining the life force from any Kroot unlucky enough to fall prey. The ghost eaters, for all their recent triumphs, were adrift. Their psychic sight, once a source of strength, was now a gateway to unending horror. They were connected to the warp, not by choice or understanding, but by a terrible, accidental vulnerability. And like a beacon in the darkest night, their uncontrolled psychic emanations were now broadcasting their existence to every malign entity in the immaterium, and worse, to the far more organized and equally brutal forces of the galaxy. The whispers from beyond were no longer just whispers. They were hungry snarls, and the creatures behind them were beginning to tear at the edges of reality, demanding entry. Kalar knew, with a certainty that threatened to crush his spirit, that they were no longer alone on Xylos Prime, and their presence had not gone unnoticed by the wider, crueler universe. The faint, persistent, psychic hum emanating from Xylos Prime, a raw, uncontrolled beacon of burgeoning mental energy, resonated across the vast, tumultuous expanse of the Segmentum Pacificus. It was a ripple in the sea of souls, a disturbance too distinct to be ignored, particularly by those charged with vigilance against such abominations. The beacon ultimately pierced the psychic wards of a formidable individual. Inquisitor Lyra Vance of the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitor Vance was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and grudging respect, even within the austere halls of the Holy Ordos. Unlike many of her peers who specialized in the eradication of specific Xenos threats, Vance possessed an almost academic, chilling fascination for the truly unique, the aberrant, the evolutionary dead ends that defied easy categorization. She didn't just seek to destroy. She sought to understand, to dissect, to catalog the means by which a species could become a threat, often at the cost of countless imperial lives and the purity of her own soul. Her mind was a steel trap, her gaze sharp enough to flay secrets from a living saint, and her methods were as ruthless as they were effective. She saw the galaxy not as a canvas for the Emperor's divine will, but as a dangerous, ever-evolving biological threat. And every new species was a puzzle to be solved, or a disease to be quarantined and then purged. The initial reports of the psychic signature from Xylos Prime were cryptic. Astropathic choirs on a nearby Imperial listening post, deep in a dusty sector of forgotten void lanes, reported fragmented, chaotic psychic static, a raw, untamed emanation unlike any known Imperial or sanctioned Xenos signal. It lacked the structured discipline of human psychers, the focused malevolence of some demonic entities, or the complex, often sorrowful echoes of the Eldar. It was primal, animalistic, yet infused with an unsettling intelligence. It spoke of burgeoning consciousness, of a nascent power struggling to comprehend itself. Inquisitor Vance, poring over the fragmented data slates in her austere sanctum aboard the cruiser. Vigilant scrutiny recognized the signature. She had encountered similar, though far weaker, traces in her long career. The faint psychic residue left by primitive species accidentally brushing against the warp, or the desperate screams of warp-tainted mutant cults. But this was different. This was growing. It pulsed with an almost organic rhythm, escalating in intensity, revealing rapid, evolutionary adaptation. Her first action was immediate and decisive. A covert scout fleet, consisting of a heavily armed frigate and 2 nimble Cobra-class destroyers, was dispatched to the coordinates. Their mission was simple: gather more data, avoid engagement, and if possible, capture a live specimen for closer study. Vance herself oversaw the mission from afar, her gaunt face illuminated by the flickering data slates, her lips pressed into a thin, contemplative line. She suspected Kroot. Their dietary habits, their rapid evolution, their innate adaptability, it all fit. But psychic Kroot? That was a terrifying novelty. The scout fleet, guided by the astropathic emanations, made the perilous warp jump to Xylos Prime's vicinity. Even from orbit, the planet radiated a subtle, unsettling energy. Sensors registered unusual atmospheric disturbances, localized gravitational anomalies, and faint, fluctuating energy signatures consistent with minor warp incursions. The planetary survey teams, descending through the stormy upper atmosphere, reported a disconcerting sensation, a faint mental echo, like a distant scream, that caused nausea and disorientation in even the most stoic Imperial Guard pilots. When the reconnaissance drones finally penetrated the dense jungle canopy and began transmitting visual data, Vance's suspicions were confirmed, and her grim fascination deepened. Her Voxcaster crackled with reports. Unusual Kroot activity, Inquisitor. Higher population density than expected, engaging in ritualistic behavior near a large cavern structure. Wait, what is that? Energy signatures. Spiking. Unidentified forms. Confirmed demonic entities. The drones relayed harrowing images. Kroot, their quills shimmering with faint, unstable energy, moving with impossible speed and coordination. And amongst them, shadowy, grotesque figures, flickering bloodletters, chittering nurglings, insidious horrors, engaged in skirmishes, or simply manifesting briefly before vanishing. The scene was one of utter chaos, a primordial battleground where the physical and immaterial clashed in a horrifying ballet. The scout fleet commander, a grizzled naval captain named Rorik, voxed Vance, his voice strained. Inquisitor, the Kroot are demonstrating highly unusual combat prowess. They seem to anticipate our drone movements and the demonic activity. It's localized, but intense. We're seeing incursions that should not be possible without a significant warp rift. Vance's eyes narrowed. Captain, desist from further direct observation. Maintain orbital distance. The Kroot are a unique vector for warp influence. They are not merely possessed. They are mutating through dietary assimilation. This is an evolutionary anomaly, a potential weapon, or a contagion of unimaginable scope. I want live specimens, Captain. Healthy ones. And I want the source of their alteration. But first, we need to understand the true scale of the threat. She ordered the vigilant scrutiny to begin preparations for a full-scale expedition, requisitioning specialized combat units, sanctioned psychers, and a detachment of Adeptus Mechanicus xenobiologists, her own private entourage of specialists, each sworn to secrecy and utterly ruthless in their pursuit of knowledge. The implications were immense. Psychic Kroot, capable of assimilating warp sensitivity through consumption. The very thought was anathema to imperial doctrine, a violation of every known law of biology and psychic stability. It was a threat that transcended simple Xenos eradication. It was a cosmic anomaly that needed to be understood, contained, or if necessary, utterly scoured from existence. Inquisitor Vance leaned back in her chair, a predatory glint in her eyes. Xylos Prime, she murmured to herself, the name tasting like ash on her tongue. You have just drawn the attention of the Emperor's wrath, and I, Inquisitor Vance, shall be its instrument. The raven's eye had fallen upon the ghost eaters, and its gaze promised not just death, but utter annihilation and the systematic dissection of their very being.